Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahi Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. In the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you find a great statement that Sri Ramakrishna makes during his conversation with his disciples and visitors. It's a very crucial one from a spiritual point of view. The sentence is, ultimately, your mind itself becomes the Guru. That's a statement. So all our efforts of, spiritual practices like prayers, meditation, listening to lectures, the worship, songs, hymns, all this are ultimately efforts to discover the Guru within. The teacher is not outside, the teacher is inside. To be more precise, the teacher is ourselves. What did Sri Ramakrishna mean by this? Our mind is doubtful, wavering. Now we become happy, after some time we become doubtful. When we try to convince ourselves through prayers, meditations and spiritual practices, when we try to convince ourselves about the reality of God, there is always a stumbling block. Every attempt is only an attempt to believe. When we say I believe in God or believe in Vedanta, at the best it is only an attempt to believe. I can give an example. Now the time is 11:40. It's quite obvious, everyone knows today is Saturday, July the 16th, 2016. It is 11:40 right now. We have no doubt about it. We don't believe it is 11:40 now. There is no need to believe on something that is obvious, that is real in the true sense of the term. So when we use the word I believe in, it means we really do not believe in. We are only trying to believe in. I don't believe my name is this. I don't have to believe it. Why? It's so obvious to me. Similarly, when we try to believe, or when we say we believe, we really do not believe, rather, but we may have sincere desire to believe in. That's why, for many spiritual seekers, after decades of prayers and meditation, some of the inner mental blocks, the cobwebs, the dark chambers of the mind do not get lighted. Skepticism, doubts, irritability, a sudden outburst of inner revolt, all this happen because there is always a gap between what we try to believe in and what we end up believing. If you want to get some insight into this spiritual phenomenon, maybe the most obvious accessible spiritual literature in Western world are the writings of Saint Teresa of Avila. In the entire Christian mystical literature, you do not have a source which is comparable to this. If you read it, you find every time she is tortured and tormented by the demon of non-belief. She herself is sincerely trying to believe in, but then doubts arise. The very fact that she feels that she has not fully succeeded in believing shows that she sincerely wants to believe in. When we feel that we are not making enough spiritual progress in our real life, it also implies that we really want to make progress. The sincerity is always one important aspect of a kind of what we call divine discontentment. But this doesn't often happen because our mind is covered by different layers, one layer over the other. Sri Ramakrishna says that when these layers are removed, then our own mind will become the guide, the guru, the teacher in our life. For that, we have to remove these layers one after another. For some time, we read the scriptures, we attend the prayers. I often heard the statement, "Oh, it was so wonderful. Puja was so wonderful. Prayer was so wonderful." It should not be wonderful. Rather, it should take us to a state of mind where we need not feel it is wonderful. It is something that really touches ourselves. It should have a transformative effect in our mind. Saint Augustine makes a statement, a real devotee of Jesus will have to confess only once in his or her life. Otherwise, confession becomes a license renewal program. Every week you renew the license for the next 6 days. So, ultimately, this is not peculiar to Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. You find in all higher mystical literature the idea that finally our own mind begins to turn towards Jesus, towards God, or towards Vedanta, depending upon the tradition. You find in Sufi mysticism also. Finally, the mind itself takes over. But the mind takes over only when the mind becomes absolutely pure. And when the mind is pure, it doesn't mean that we are always enjoying blissfulness. It means our word, our thought, and action will be on the same straight line. Then we have no problem. Because problem is there only when there is a gap between where our mind stands and where truth stands. It is more difficult to tell a lie than to tell a truth. To tell a lie, you have to invent a lie. Then you should be very careful to be consistent in repeating the same lie. Like a lawyer trains, maybe a client, how to face the persecution, how to face the arguments of the opposition lawyer in a court. An expert lawyer, brilliant lawyer has to coach his client how to tell lies in a very consistent, convincing manner. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of brilliance, a lot of preparations also. But to tell the truth, it doesn't require much preparations. So what Sri Ramakrishna means is, through prayer, through meditation, Sri Ramakrishna gives more importance to prayer. In the entire gospel, you find Sri Ramakrishna speaks much less about meditation and much more about prayer. Because prayer straight away opens our mind. Meditation is, as we understand, dhyana is a Sanskrit word, is a complicated process, and actually is possible only for a spiritual seeker who is fairly advanced. But prayer is possible even for the beginner. Opening the heart doesn't require much effort or preparation. So Sri Ramakrishna says, once our mind is attuned to God's grace, then our mind itself becomes an inner spiritual mechanism that will guide us properly in the right path, leading to ultimate spiritual destination. So mind itself becomes the guru. So ultimately, the guru is within. But then this is not an idea or a doctrine or a conviction. To reach this level of spiritual growth, we need to prepare our mind properly through prayers, reading scriptures, listening to spiritual ideas, somehow feeding the mind with spiritual food. Just as bad poisonous food makes the body sick, so also bad ideas, bad thought currents make the mind sick, irritable and skeptical. So once these things are removed, mind itself becomes the guru. That's what Sri Ramakrishna means. In the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there is a great statement. It's called Charama Sloka. That's the last great statement that Sri Krishna makes. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma sucha. This is the 66th verse of the 18th chapter. The literal meaning is this. After teaching all the 4 yogas, karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, all the different parts, different kinds of spiritual practices, Lord Krishna makes one statement. It's very practical. Now look here, there is one final solution to all the problems you are facing. He tells Krishna tells Arjuna. 66th verse of the 18th chapter. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. If you read the translation, there is a lot of chance for or misunderstanding. It means give up all dharmas. And dharma, if you read literal translation, maybe, righteousness. Give up all righteousness and take refuge in me. I shall save you from all sins. Do not worry. This is the literal translation. What's the meaning of giving up all dharmas? It doesn't mean give up all righteousness. It means even the idea of what is righteous, what is not, what is true, what is false, what is the right thing, what is the wrong thing. Even this discrimination, this discerning mind, give up. Turn your mind completely over to God. Because once you turn your mind completely to God, that God takes over. Then what happens? The mind cannot do anything wrong. We cannot do anything wrong. We won't be able to do something which is sinful, which is harmful either to ourselves or to others. So you need not take great care to stick to dharma, because whatever you do will be automatically dharma. Dharma means the right thing. You need not make a lot of effort to stick to truth alone, and you need not make a lot of effort to avoid falsehood, because you will never be doing anything that is false, because your mind is linked to God. So the God's grace flows towards your mind. Your mind gets completely colored by the divine spirit. Then mind itself becomes the guru. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says that ultimately mind itself is your guru, your teacher. And again Sri Ramakrishna makes a statement: if the mind is not in your control, then no teacher can help you. Otherwise Jesus could have converted all the pebbles and stones into loaf of bread and fed all the entire population of the locality. He didn't do that. No one, no incarnation, no spiritual seeker, no spiritual teacher distributes liberation free of charge to everyone. Jesus himself wanted that. That is the psychology of the Grand Inquisitor in Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky, Grand Inquisitor, the 5th book of Dostoevsky's Brothers of Karamazov. There's a scene when the Grand Inquisitor, the Cardinal, asked Jesus to come. He visits the prison and Jesus is brought forward. Then Cardinal says, we are not with you, we are with him. We are not with you, we are with the devil, the Satan. That's what Cardinal says. Why have you come to meddle with all this interference? We thought we finished your job 1500 years back. The scene is set in 1580 during the Spanish Inquisition. Then why do you bother again? And again, he tried to tempt you 3 times. You said no. See, Satan tried to tempt Jesus 3 times. And Jesus turned down these temptations. Why? Because Jesus wanted humanity to exercise its own free will. Then only we can get spiritual liberation. Nobody can bribe us into spirituality. It's not possible. Our own mind should be ready. If our mind is not ready, no incarnation can take us to liberation. If our mind is ready, then maybe if we go to Berkeley University Library and take a good book and read, that could be the beginning of a new life new chapter in your life. If the mind is ready, even an occasional accidental reading of a book or a scripture can be the beginning of a new life. What to think of Augustine? St. Augustine, he heard some voice, some biblical statement that is the beginning of a new chapter in his life because his mind was ready. So when our mind is ready, then our mind itself becomes a teacher. Just as a word or a deed, any of this will do. So Sri Ramakrishna says, mind itself becomes a teacher. And unless mind is ready, no instruction will be of any help to us. That's a very important point we have to keep in mind. That's what Sri Ramakrishna means. In one of our most important Vedantic scriptures, it's called Gaudapada Karika. There's a grand statement. Anadi mayaya supto yatha jiva prabuddhyati ajamanidram aswapnam advaidam vidyati tatha. The meaning is this. We are in a state of eternal stupor, sleep, spiritual sleep. Then a teacher comes and wakes up. When you open our eyes, suddenly we realize what we actually are. But then, if that person is pretending to be asleep, then even the teacher gives him a kick or a blow, he won't get up. Suppose the person who is sleeping is really not asleep. If he pretending to be asleep, then the teacher cannot wake him up. If the teacher may beat him, he will not wake up, open his eyes. But if he is really asleep, then if the teacher gives him one touch, he will wake up. Which means our mind should be pure, mind should be ready. Then only we can progress in spiritual life. Because when the mind is not ready, God's grace also doesn't work. In the St. Teresa of Avila, there is an interesting, which I quoted once long back on the same platform. There is a very interesting description of the psychology of grace and the psychology of how grace helps us to discover the Guru within. The analogy is taken from the story of the life of a farmer. A farmer is trying to irrigate the field. The field is dry, full of stones, thorns, pebbles, and so on, weeds and all that. He's trying to irrigate the field. His mind is the field. Now, before he irrigates the field should be made ready. The mind should be ready before God's grace or the teacher's instruction comes. So the farmer has to work hard. He has to remove the stones, the pebbles, the thorns, everything. And once these things are removed, he has various ways, various methods by which he can bring water to the field and irrigate the field. He can make use of buckets, he can draw water from the well, cut a canal, bring water from the nearby river, use a water mill in those days. There are many ways of bringing water to the field. There are many ways of irrigating the mind with spiritual water, with spiritual life. But before we do that, we should remove all skepticism, mental blocks, barriers, stones and pebbles and thistles and weeds and grass which have grown in the mind should be removed before the spiritual water is brought in to irrigate the mind. So Saint Teresa says, she goes on, in fact one of the grandest imageries in the world spiritual literature. From another perspective, it is a grand illustration of the psychology of the blending of Purusha Prayatna and Ishwara Kripa, means human effort and God's grace. Then she says, suppose it starts raining, then you don't have to work hard to bring water to irrigate the field. So rains correspond to God's grace. If the mind is not ready, then if God's grace is always there, mind won't, it's of no use, really speaking. So the mind should be clean stuff. All pebbles, stones, all weeds and grass. So it is said, in the description of the spiritual phenomenon of the dark night of the soul, in the Christian mystical literature, there it's given, of course, described differently. It often is linked to Satan, the devil, and the temptation. But from Vedantic perspective, it is the same thing, but in Vedantic spiritual tradition, it is put in a different language, that's all. See. Now, the point is, before the God's grace descends, the mind should be ready. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So before it starts raining, the mind should be ready. Otherwise, what happens? The dark night of the soul. You can find, among many great spiritual seekers, two types of spiritual seekers are mentioned. In Narada Bhakti Sutras, in sutra form, and the mystical literature in a more graphic style. There's, irritability, for example, skepticism, a tendency to look down, and feeling of total helplessness after practicing prayer, meditation, and so on for some time. There are two interpretations. One, this is the manifestation of the fact that mind is not ready. Or it could be the manifestation of the natural barrier which every sincere spiritual seeker may have to confront. If it is the manifestation of the inner problems, the mind is not ready, mind is naturally wicked and skeptical and doubtful and irritable, then it is like a circle. The skepticism and doubt goes in a wheel, never coming, we are not able to come out of it. If that irritability is the sincere manifestation of a spiritual seeker, then a scripture or the instruction from a teacher can help the spiritual seeker to come out of it. These are two examples given in the literature. So the point is, a teacher can help us when our mind is ready. And when the mind is ready And when the teacher's instruction comes, then it is only the beginning of the discovery of the real teacher within. That is why Swami Vivekananda makes an interesting point. If you see a person who is skeptical, doubtful, irritable, and hypercritical, and always discontented, and then it could be either that person is not practicing spiritual sadhana properly, or it could be the dark night of the soul which every sincere seeker has to go through. But very soon he will see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's what Swami Vivekananda says. To give an example of the discovery of the Guru within, I can just narrate one story from the Chandogya Upanishad. It is a very interesting, if those of you are interested, you can refer to the 6th chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad. There are, maybe 14th Brahmana, there is an interesting story of how a spiritual seeker finds his teacher, and how the teacher finally enables him to discover the Guru within himself. So the story is like this. A pilgrim was traveling from India to Kandahar. Today it's called Kandahar. It's a city in Afghanistan. In those days there were land routes between Western India and today's Afghanistan. Maybe the story is set somewhere in 6000 BC. So the Chandogya Upanishad is a very ancient text. So there, the pilgrim was moving slowly towards his hometown in Kandahar. Gandhara Purusha Drishtantaha. This is the technical Sanskrit name given. That means the example of a spiritual seeker who comes from Kandahar. That's the idea. Gandhara Purusha Drishtanta. An illustration, example, to highlight a spiritual point taken from the life of a pilgrim who was moving from India to Kandahar in Afghanistan, today's Afghanistan. At that time it was called Gandhara Desha. So as this pilgrim was going, a group of robbers caught him, ambushed him, robbed him, and took him in the thick of the forest and tied him to a tree. He was blindfolded and he was tied to the tree. And the robbers went their way after robbing everything. Now, what should the poor man do if he wants to get liberation from this pathetic condition of his? He should shout, he should cry, he should weep. He should somehow try to draw the attention of some passers-by walking on the road. Suppose he keeps quiet, I am in a perfectly happy condition, quite bound, blindfolded, cannot move. It's called, it is called spiritual, it's anadimaya supta in the text. It is like the condition of a person who is spiritually asleep and doesn't want to wake up. But if he really wants to get liberation, then he should make some effort. What's the effort? He should make a lot of noise. And then he will attract the attention of the passers-by, who may take pity on him, go to the forest, untie the ropes, and take him out of the thick forests and bring him to the main road. And show him, you walk this way, you can get back to your hometown. So the story goes like this. This man made a lot of noise. He cried and wept. And a teacher, a compassionate teacher, a traveler was walking, taking the same road. He went to the vendor and brought him to the main street, untied the ropes and removed the blindfold, then told him, you take this road and you'll reach your destination. Now, after even getting this instruction, the traveler, if he wants to reach his hometown, he should use his intelligence. So Shankaracharya, writing his commentary, says, a spiritual seeker, even after getting instruction from a teacher, should make use of his intelligence, his faculty, his thinking powers. He should make use of reading scriptures, listening to ideas, prayers, and he should follow other spiritual instructions. Then he will get back to his destination. And when he uses his faculties, in the process, Sri Ramakrishna says, he will suddenly discover that his own mind has got a spiritual color. His own mind has suddenly changed. It has colored, it has imbibed the divine spiritual ideas. And so it has become his own teacher. So, the Guru within here means, as we proceed in spiritual life, finally we discover that the reality is within. So all the prayers, meditations and spiritual practices are only attempt to finally discover the reality that the teacher is our own mind. An external teacher only helps us to recognize the fact that the real teacher is within. And if the real teacher, the mind is not ready, no external teacher can help us. That point Sri Ramakrishna makes very emphatically. Unless your mind cooperates, you cannot make progress in spiritual life. In Vedantic tradition, especially in Advaita Vedantic tradition, there are two types of effects or impact on the disciples when they get instruction. Technically, it is called Shabda Aparokshvada and Prasankhyanavada, and these are technical terms. So I'll explain this. One method is this. Highly advanced spiritual seekers won't need a lot of instructions or efforts. When they get the instruction first, immediately, the effect is immediate. The mind gets cleared of all cobwebs, no more irritability, no more skepticism, no more inner contentment, no more layers. That layers is a very important word. The main problem and the main reason for the mental block, the main cause of all the obstacles in spiritual life is our mind is covered by various layers, not a single layer. When there's only one layer, a single instruction will help us to remove it. And there are so many layers. What happens, It requires a lot of effort. So highly advanced souls, if they listen just once, as I said, if you go to Berkeley University, if you are a really earnest spiritual seeker, reading once, one great book, listening to one great teacher will be enough. I can give the example of Paul Brondon. He was an American. Somehow he came to know of Ramana Maharshi. Something he read, and he decided, he felt a great attraction to Ramana Maharshi's teachings. Then he went to Madras, and there he happened to meet the great Swami Shankaracharya. His name is Chandrasekhara Saraswati. He's a very senior monk of those days. It happened in the early decades of 20th century. The Chandrasekhara Bharati Swamiji said, I am not your teacher. Your teacher is there in Tiruvannamalai. And he went, that was the end of it. Very beginning of a new life for him. Why? Because his mind was ready. On the other hand, you find people whose minds are not ready, going on struggling. They also reach the goal. That's Vedanta says. Only they may have to wait several years, several decades, maybe a few more lives. That's all. So, Sri Ramakrishna himself demonstrated this in his own life. He listened to the Mahavakya, the great instruction from Totapuri only once, and immediately he reached the Anubhuti, he got into Samadhi. Because the mind was ready. It is something like this. Suppose you have lost something very precious, your passport or something, which is very important for you. You are in a foreign country. Suppose you suddenly find your passport is missing. And then you go to the place where you are sitting or standing, to find out if it is lying somewhere there. And if you find your passport lying on the floor, on the seat where you are sitting, which you may have forgotten, immediately you will recognize it's your passport. You won't think for a long time whether it's my passport or not. No. Why? Because you are searching for it. Passport is something very precious. So you won't think of anything else other than getting back your passport. You are in a foreign country. So you go back to the place where you sat, maybe in the library, for some time reading a book. You reach there, you find it lying there on the chair. Then you won't think for a long time. You recognize it's my passport. On the spot, you recognize it. Why? Because when you are searching for the passport, your mind was completely focused on that particular object. You are seeing the passport in your mind. So when you saw it lying on the chair, there is no need to think further. Immediately recognize. Similarly, when our mind is ready, when our mind is focused on God, on the spiritual ideal, then one instruction, just listening to one lecture, or reading one great book will be enough. Otherwise, a number of lives of efforts may be required, still we may reach, only you may get delayed. So this is called Shabda Aparokshawada. It literally means when you get the Shabda, when you get instruction, immediately Aparoksha Anubhuti, the highest spiritual experience, will be yours on the spot. This happened to Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna's whole life was spent on meditation, prayer, worship, nothing else. He did not do anything else in his whole life. 12 years, he did not feel the sunrise or sunset. His nephew had to feed him food because he was completely lost in thought of God. So when the instruction came, it was immediate experience for him. Then there is another kind of instruction. It means Prasankhyanavada, where you get instruction from a teacher. It's only instruction. It's only an idea, a concept, a great grand idea for you, not an experience. It should become an experience. Unless it becomes an experience, it is only a word. So G-O-D is a word. G-O-D can also become an experience. There's a wide gap between the two. So those who are not advanced enough, those whose minds are not ready, may have to work hard to translate G-O-D, the word, into G-O-D, the experience. God, the word, should be translated into God, the experience. And it takes some time. How do we travel from an idea or a concept to its experience level? For that, we need a lot of spiritual practices. First of all, we must practice what is real, what is unreal, what is our real goal, what's the purpose of our life. We must always think of prioritization. If we put everything on the same level of priority, we will not reach the goal. That's the main problem. See, in life, especially in spiritual life, prioritization, putting things in proper order is very, very significant. So meditation, or prayer, or scriptural reading, all these are not easy things to do, not very pleasant for a beginner in spiritual life. The difference between an advanced seeker and a beginner in spiritual life is, for a beginner, prayer is a big work. For an advanced soul, work is also a prayer. So the beginning of spiritual life, for a beginner especially, prioritization is very important. We must be able to ignore, be indifferent towards certain things in this world, and set our mind, focus our mind on higher things. Otherwise, no spiritual progress is possible. Sometimes people pretending to practice karma yoga think everything is important. Everything they put at the same category. That is wrong. It is all right for an advanced spiritual seeker. For an advanced spiritual seeker, he can sit in a marketplace and pray. For a beginner in a temple or a church, it's difficult to pray. They, in their mind, they will be living in a marketplace if they are not ready to pray. Even they may be sitting in the temple or a church, but mentally they will be sitting in the marketplace if their mind is not ready. But those who are advanced in spiritual life, even when they are sitting in the marketplace, it makes no difference for them between sitting in the marketplace and sitting in a temple or a church. That's what Swami Vivekananda made a great statement. It was made in San Francisco. Standing in the marketplace, waiting for trams and tram cars, can you think of God? And you find that quotation in Gargi's book. That's the highest stage in spiritual life. But we should not imagine that we have reached that stage just because we know that intellectually. Often we imagine that what we know about, it's already become a reality for us in our mental life. It's not so. Many things are only ideas for us. We often miss, maybe willingly or unwillingly, consciously or unconsciously, we sometimes imagine that what we believe in has become a reality, a real experience for us. It is not true. There is always a wide gap between where the intellect stands and mind stands. So, for the beginners, it is important to translate God, the word, into God, the experience. And that requires a lot of practice. So the first important step is prioritization. Technically, Shankaracharya called Nitya Anitya Vastu Viveka, discerning of what is real and what is unreal. Maybe in modern context we can say what is spiritually important and what is spiritually not so very important. So we should be able to ignore or be indifferent towards certain things and focus on the main spiritual ideal if you want to make progress in spiritual life. Otherwise it is not possible. So that's the first thing. The second important step is related to this, that is renunciation. Renunciation of the lower ideas, lower things, the relative, and upholding the higher spiritual values. So it is called, Ihamutra Phalabhoga Viraga, it's Sanskrit, which literally means total renunciation of the idea of pleasure or enjoyment in this world or next. So first of all, the step is prioritization in daily life. Thinking the secular, the worldly things as of secondary importance, and focusing on the spiritual. Somebody may raise the question, we should look upon everything as equally important. Swamiji says that every work is prayer, every work is worship. Remember, that is an ideal. To reach that ideal, for the beginner, we have to put things in priority. Just as a small kindergarten child cannot quote from a book prescribed for university students and say, well, maybe who has not, the child may not have even learned the alphabet. So he cannot say, he cannot quote, he cannot aim at what the university students are trying to teach or learn. The third stage is, of course, self-control, self-restraint. And the fourth important thing is mumukshata, means a strong desire for spiritual liberation. That's a key to recognizing, rediscovering the guru within, the teacher within. Once we have a strong desire for spiritual progress, liberation may be a higher goal. To begin with, a desire to move away from these worldly things and to move towards a higher spiritual goal. That desire is key. Because if you have a real sincere desire, that will take us a long way towards our goal. You'll find in our life, we certainly work hard to achieve what we desire. No doubt about it. A child who wants to become a football player will certainly work hard for it. You need not force him to do that. If you have sincere desire for something, if that desire is sincere, then we don't need much promptings to work in that direction. Those who want to make money certainly work hard to make money. Those who want to get higher degrees in university, they will certainly work day and night. Actually, if you have a strong desire for spiritual life, then we will naturally work for it. If that desire is sincere, that's an important point. So Sri Ramakrishna calls the sincere desire with the technical name Vyakulata. Vyakulata is nothing but a strong desire for spiritual life plus Shraddha. This is Vyakulata. So a real sincere desire for spiritual life will certainly help us to manifest our inner energies and direct those energies in spiritual goal. So the second possibility, as I say, that is Prasankhyanavada. That means those who are not spiritually advanced enough will certainly have to work hard. But we have to recognize the fact that we have to work hard. In spiritual life, it is not a matter of choice. It's a matter of evolution. If you go to a market, if you want to buy an orange or apple, you can choose. See, spiritual life, should I opt for the higher path or lower path? There is no option. Depends upon where we stand. A kindergarten child cannot have an option. Should I join the Harvard or Stanford, or should I go to the kindergarten? He has no choice actually. He has to start from where he stands. But in spiritual life, frequently we think it's a matter of choice. I would rather go for jnana. Bhakti is not good for me. I would go highest. So it's like, well, I would rather buy orange, not apple. So that kind of choice doesn't work in spiritual life. So you find in the gospel itself, master and disciple, the first chapter, there's a very interesting discussion, a dialogue between Sri Ramakrishna and his disciple, Mahendranath Gupta. He's the chronicler, the historian of Sri Ramakrishna, who wrote down the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Okay, now, 12:30, yes. Okay, now, I shall conclude within a few minutes. The scene is this. First, Mahendranath Gupta, his mind was ready. How do we know his mind was ready? He was an extremely well-educated person. We have to think of 19th century India, where the educated elite were so much interested in European philosophy, European literature, and all kinds of non-Catholic Protestant Christian theology. Catholic theology was not popular in those days. So they used to study Kant, Hegel, Berkeley, Shakespeare, Philip Sidney, and so on. And they were very proud of it, of course. And M was such a person. He was a postgraduate degree holder in the later half of 19th century. And he was well versed in Sanskrit language also, Sanskrit literature. He's an extremely well educated man. But he had a huge joint family, which was not very rich. So one day, there was a lot of family squabbles in the home. So he left his home at midnight, close to midnight. And his wife was a very wonderful woman, also followed him. He was thinking of committing suicide because of family problems, economic problems, joins family, those things. Well-educated man. And he walked, traveled for a long distance in the midnight, reached a place, his relative, but he was not very willing, very hospitable. So he continued his journey. His wife stayed with one of her relatives. Finally, this man walked, traveled, took a carriage, and reached his nephew's home, Siddheswara Majunda, that's his name. So he stayed there that night. Next day evening, his nephew told him, there is a wonderful garden near on the banks of Ganga, Dakshineshwar, and a Paramahamsa is living there. Are you interested in seeing him? They were traveling, moving from place to place on the banks of Ganga. So Yam said, all right. So in the evening, they reached Dakshineshwar temple, and as both of them reached the door, they looked inside, and Sri Ramakrishna was sitting there surrounded by his disciples and students. And as they found this great teacher expounding some spiritual ideas, suddenly Yam felt it was the ancient sage Sukadeva in Vedic times instructing his disciples, or Chaitanya. Like that, suddenly the images of ancient Vedic sages, teachers, flashed in his mind. Anyway, he went out and saw the temple, he came back, and he wanted to, of course, the person who was guarding was standing outside, let him in. Then Sri Ramakrishna asked him, where are you coming from? He did not relate his private problems or worries, domestic problems. Yeah, I'm coming from Viranagar. Where are you staying? So he gave the name of the person and with whom he was staying. And all that. After spending some time, he left. Sri Ramakrishna told him, you come back again. Come again. Now that was the beginning of a new life in Yam's life. Now his mind was ready. Why was his mind ready, This man was so well educated and so proud of his education that you find in the conversation between Yam and Sri Ramakrishna later. So Sri Ramakrishna asked him, where are you living? Are you married? And how is your wife? And he said, my wife is all right, but she is ignorant. So Sri Ramakrishna, you are a very learned, knowledgeable person. So like that, I'm not going to those details. A few words from Sri Ramakrishna made his mind ready. Now, if any of us in his position, you would have retorted, mind you. But Sri Ramakrishna's reply, the way Sri Ramakrishna instructed, had an effect on Yam's mind. And that was the beginning of a new life for Yam. The man who was thinking of committing suicide, putting an end to his life. He was a prominent man, a prominent citizen of the city, a well-educated man. But he himself found, his life was not giving him much satisfaction. So he was looking for something, a way out of the problem. Not economic problem. He wanted somebody to teach him, give him the skill to confront his problems. And Sri Ramakrishna was the answer. When he met Sri Ramakrishna, that the end of a dark chapter in his life, at the beginning of a new life. Sri Ramakrishna once told him, see, and that word went very deep in his mind, which shows how deeply his mind was ready to receive Sri Ramakrishna's instruction. By the grace of the teacher, by the grace of God, even the worst tragedies in life will vanish like a strong wind drives away dark clouds. So if this God's grace is there, then by God's grace, in the worst tragedies will disappear if you open your mind to God. And it literally happened in his life. Thanks to him, we have got one of the greatest spiritual classics in our hands today. So, what Sri Ramakrishna did was, Sri Ramakrishna helped him to find the divine teacher within himself. And it happened, it clicked because Yam's mind was ready for it. When Yam's mind was ready, then the instruction worked. And that was the beginning of a new life. So, today, we do not remember any of the great prominent intellectuals who were the contemporaries of Yam. But Yam remains immortal. When we read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you find you cannot forget Yam. In fact, he is considered to be one of the greatest chroniclers of spiritual literature in modern times. See, give a grand example. When our mind is ready, then a book, an idea, or a word, or a prayer will be enough to help us to discover the divine teacher within. That is the greatness of Sri Ramakrishna, and also equally the greatness of his disciple, his chronicler. So thank you. Now after this we will have flower offering. So those of you who are interested can come forward after this ready for flower offering. And during the flower offering, we will have musical offering by Felder Graham. And after that, we will have luncheon in Vivekananda Hall. Thank you. Now we will have flower offering, followed by piano recital by Felder Graham. Thank you.